Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 734, and today is December 27th, 2024. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. I hope everybody had a great Christmas or did something for the holidays, spent some time with family, friends, or at least had a couple nice days off work that you got to relax and enjoy. And we are back at it here today, bringing you the bad news. I did mention that I was going to put out an episode of the Kyle Anzalone show on the podcast feed of Conflicts of Interest. I just got really busy, new baby, holidays, and things over the past couple of days. So I do plan to still do that sometime before the new year, maybe this weekend. Whenever I get an extra minute, I am going to put that into the Conflicts of Interest feed, an episode of the Kyle Anzalone show, which reminds me, and just to plug all my regular stuff, my shows are one's hosted at the Libertarian Institute, Conflicts of Interest. The other, the Kyle Anzalone show, you can find on the YouTube page. It's the first link in the show notes page, so it's very easy to find. Everything I do ends up at antiwar.com, either on the blog, the news section, or the viewpoints. And of course, you could subscribe to this show, YouTube, Rumble, Odysee for the video version of the show. And it's up anywhere you can listen to audio podcasts. Follow me on Twitter at @KyleAnzalone_. All right, we're starting off with this article that I wrote yesterday for the Institute. Biden orders surge of weapons to Ukraine in response to major Russian attack. So Russia launched a missile and drone barrage targeting Ukrainian energy infrastructure. The attack followed a Ukrainian drone strike on a Russian residential building. President Joe Biden said he was outraged by the Russian attack and ordered the Pentagon to continue to surge weapons to Ukraine. So on Wednesday, Russia fired an estimated 170 drones and missiles at Ukrainian energy infrastructure, causing several deaths, I believe from the Ukrainian count 6 to 7, widespread damage, and power outages. So Biden said in response, the purpose of this outrageous attack was to cut off the people's access to heat and electricity during winter and to jeopardize the safety of its grid. President Zelensky denounced the attack on Twitter and said blackouts remain. He explained over 70 missiles, including ballistic ones and more than 100 attack drones. The targets are energy infrastructure. They continue to fight for a blackout in Ukraine. Our defenders managed to shoot down more than 50 missiles and a significant number of drones. Unfortunately, there have been hits. As of now, there are still several outages in several regions. Biden subsequently ordered the surge of military support for Kiev. He explained in recent months the United States has provided Ukraine with hundreds of air defense missiles and more are on the way. I have directed the Department of Defense to continue its surge of weapons deliveries to Ukraine, and the United States will continue to work tirelessly to strengthen Ukraine's position in defense against Russian forces. The Russian attack on Ukraine followed a series of provocations by Kiev. Ukraine has used long-range Western missiles to hit targets deep inside Russian territory, fired drones at civilian targets in Russia, and assassinated a Russian general. On Thursday, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said the Kremlin may target Ukraine's decision-making centers if Kiev continues to order terror attacks. He said, "We select targets for strikes on the territory of Ukraine, proceeding solely from the threat to Russia. These may be military facilities and defense enterprises. Decision-making centers in Kiev can also be such targets." And so this does seem to be an indication that from Russia that they're prepared to continue to ramp up the strikes. And hitting Ukraine's energy infrastructure, especially in the middle of winter, is certainly hitting civilian targets. And both the Russians and the Ukrainians play around with this. The Israelis too, they do it in Yemen, where they'll say, oh, the energy infrastructure, some of that energy is used by the military, and therefore that becomes a legitimate military target. I really don't like that logic, that thinking, whether it's the Russians hitting Ukrainian targets, Ukrainians hitting Russian targets, Israeli hitting Yemeni targets, or Syrian targets. I think when you're destroying the energy infrastructure, you are hurting the civilian civilian population quite a bit. And as we've seen in some places, Syria, Gaza, children can certainly freeze to death during the winter. I know that's something that for those of us who live in the West isn't necessarily a reality that we often confront, but at places in the world, winter certainly presents a pretty high death risk to infants. And when all the energy is being turned off by U.S. sanctions, etc., it gets quite a bit more intense. And so, these kinds of attacks are disturbing. At the same time, it's unsurprising when Ukraine is launching attacks on Russian civilian infrastructure, Russian energy infrastructure, that they're going to respond in kind. Of course, the solution to all of this is to pull United States support from Ukraine, help the Ukrainians out at the negotiating table. The United States certainly has some positions that we could negotiate on with the Russians in order to make get the Ukrainians a little bit better of a deal. But this is, this whole we just had to continue fighting this war for the Ukrainians is ridiculous and is hurting the Ukrainian citizens at this point. Next up here, Israel builds a beachside resort in Gaza for IDF soldiers. So the Israeli military has built what they're labeling a beachside resort on the coast of the northern Gaza Strip, where the IDF soldiers occupying Gaza territory can relax and take a break from waging a genocidal war. According to the Israeli news Ynet, the retreat was built alongside a water desalination plant that provides 60,000 liters of drinking water per day. At the resort, IDF soldiers can enjoy a cafe, hostel-style meals, massages, and hot showers, and have access to mental health support and medical services. So, Chief Warrant Officer David Cherman, the head of the food services at the IDF's Southern Command, told Ynet, this is Gaza, right? Yet we have created a sense of home here, with iced coffee, espresso, protein shakes, toast, fresh fruit, and even ice cream on the warmer days. One soldier said each platoon gets a day of rest for every 10 days that they're in Gaza. The Ynet report said the IDF built similar refreshment centers elsewhere in Gaza, but they don't match the scope and the quality of this one. The construction of such facilities is a sign that Israel is planning for long-term military occupation of Gaza, and it is not interested in a hostage deal with Hamas that would lead to a permanent ceasefire. Also on this one, I've read a couple articles recently from people in Israel, and look, the top concern here is the Palestinians. It's not the Israeli soldiers. And so, I don't want to just talk all about how awful this is for the Israeli soldiers, because certainly it's far, far more horrific for the Palestinian people than for the Israeli soldiers. But they are starting to talk about moral injury amongst the Israeli soldiers, mental health, PTSD problems, but also the moral injury that we kind of had talked about in the past on this show, and know that's a separate thing necessarily from a direct like PTSD. And, I wonder if things like this are particularly toxic to the minds of the Israeli soldiers, because it creates such a class difference, such a differentiation between the Israeli soldiers and the Palestinians. The Palestinians forget a massage. They can't even get food, right? Like they can't even bury their dead. The dogs and the cats, the former pets of Gaza, are now eating the dead along the streets. The children are starving to death in numbers. People can't eat. People can't drink. Nobody has homes. There's no medical service. And so if on one hand, you have the millions of people and you rule over them, you decide what happens to them. And every 10th day, you get to take a break and you get to go get a massage and have a nice coffee and eat a steak. Then I'm sure that this helps too, and I mean helps from the perspective of the IDF, Netanyahu, right, to condition the soldiers to carry out this kind of awful acts, right? I imagine that there's a lot of Israeli soldiers who feel bad when they're put in the position of Gaza. And again, I'm not trying to invoke all sympathy and forget all about the Palestinians. We'll talk plenty about them next. I'm just trying to talk about the psychology of this, of allowing the Israeli troops to be pampered right alongside that there's a genocide going on. Not only are you reinforcing that, what they're doing in Gaza is good because, you're giving them massages and all these luxuries, but also I would guess that you're creating quite a difference in everybody's head of, oh, we're real people. We have all of this, and then everybody else, they're essentially just worse off than dogs, right? Lesser than animals. They get absolutely nothing, and we get everything. And so yeah, I just imagine that, this kind of extends to that type of moral injury we're seeing among Israeli soldiers, and conditioning the Israeli soldiers to continue this genocide with these kind of facilities. So Colonel Michael Azula, a logistics officer for the Southern Command, said the facility reflects our readiness for prolonged operations, even as a ceasefire is reached in context of a hostage exchange. And so basically they're saying, like, look, the Israeli soldiers are going to be getting their massages and iced coffees in Gaza, even if there's a ceasefire, which really says that these facilities are not going anywhere, especially not anytime soon. So the Israeli military has been demolishing buildings and establishing military outposts across Gaza, mainly in the Nazarene corridor, which separates northern Gaza from the rest of the strip, but also along the Philadelphia corridor and the buffer zone along the entire Israel-Gaza border. In the northern Gaza governorate, Israeli troops have been conducting an ethnic cleansing campaign and demolishing buildings so that Palestinians have nowhere to return. The destruction and establishment of military bases will likely lead to Jewish settlements in Gaza, an idea supported by many Israeli ministers and members of the Knesset. And Jabalia was once a fairly large area, and we talked about this on the last episode of the show, has been turned into a complete ghost town, every single building destroyed. All right, next up here, U.S.-funded group removes reported warning of famine in northern Gaza after complaint from U.S. ambassador. So the Famine Early Warning System Network, a group funded by U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, has removed a report from its website that warned it was highly likely that famine is occurring in northern Gaza after a complaint by the U.S. ambassador to Israel. The report noted that Israel has imposed a near total blockade of humanitarian and commercial food supplies on the northern Gaza governorate, which includes the cities of Bet Lahana, Bet Hanun, and Jabalia. The report says that 65 to 75,000 civilians remain in the area, including children who have been unable to or prevented from evacuating. U.S. Ambassador Jack Lew issued a statement slamming the report, saying there are far fewer civilians in those areas, an acknowledgement of the ethnic cleansing campaign that Israel has been conducting in northern Gaza since early October. He said the report issued today on Gaza by FuseNet relies on data that is outdated and inaccurate. He claimed there are somewhere between 7,000 and 15,000 civilians in northern Gaza, and added, at a time when it is inaccurate information is causing confusions and accusation, is irresponsible to issue a report like this. FuseNet said it used UN numbers from mid-October and that it would update its report with the latest figures, but the group did not withdraw its assessment that famine was likely occurring in northern Gaza. And let me explain, it shouldn't really matter. And in fact, if there's fewer people in Gaza, in northern Gaza, it may actually mean that the famine status is more likely. So from my understanding, that for a famine to be declared, the real issue is how many people are dying of deprivation per day. And the ratio needs to be 2 to 1,000 or 20 to 10,000. So, 2 of every 1,000 people who are in this area dying every day. And so if they're taking the number of people that are dying from deprivation each day, and then, guessing how many people are in northern Gaza, if they're guessing that there's more people in northern Gaza, that means that's a lower ratio of the number of people dying to the number of people there. And so if we cut that number to around 10,000, and say there's 20 people dying a day, then you're going to hit that famine number. So the argument by Lou, I don't think really makes any sense. So last month, the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, the IPC, said there was a strong likelihood that famine was occurring in northern Gaza. Lou also claimed that the U.S. was working to ensure more humanitarian access to northern Gaza, but the area has been under total siege and only 12 aid trucks, 12 trucks have been able to make deliveries since October 6th. So that's almost 2.5, getting on 3 months here. 12 trucks. That's nothing. And when you see these trucks, by the way, you know, we picture a semi going down the side of the highway, and that, you know, the back of that truck is full, right? Like top to bottom, it's full. And when you see these trucks bringing food aid into Gaza, it's like half full, maybe, you know what I mean? Like if you filled up the whole volume, the space of one of those shipping containers, it's maybe half of that, right? Like there's pallets across the ground front to back, but they don't stretch all the way to the top of those containers. And so it's really just not that much food and aid that were on those 12 trucks that have been able to enter northern Gaza during this time. All right, next up here, the slaughter of journalists continues. Israeli strikes in Gaza killed 5 journalists and 5 hospital workers. So Israeli attacks in Gaza on Thursday included a strike on a vehicle that killed 5 journalists and strikes near the Kamal Adwan hospital in northern Gaza, which killed at least 5 medical workers. So early Tuesday morning, an Israeli strike hit a vehicle clearly marked press that killed 5 journalists for the TV channel Al-Quds today. According to Gaza's government media office, the slaughter brings the total number of Palestinian journalists killed by Israeli forces since October of 2023 to over 200. The press vehicle was hit near the Al Adwan hospital in the Nusra refugee camp in central Gaza. According to Al Jazeera, one journalist's wife was in the hospital giving birth to their first child. The Israeli security agency Shin Bet acknowledged the strike and claimed it targeted Palestinian Islamic Jihad militants who were masquerading as journalists, but offered no evidence to back up their claim. According to Dropside News, 3 medical workers were killed on a strike in a residential building near the Kamal Adwan hospital. A total of 50 Palestinians were believed to have been killed in the strikes. There are approximately 50 martyrs, including 3 of our medical staff, under the rubble of a building opposite Kamal Adwan hospital after strikes by the occupation forces, said Dr. Hassam Abu Saifa, director of the Kamal Adwan hospital. The dead medical workers included a pediatrician, a lab specialist, and a maintenance worker. 2 paramedics were killed in a separate strike near the hospital. Kamal Adwan has come under near daily Israeli attacks since the military began an ethnic cleansing campaign that focused on northern Gaza. The Israeli military has been forcibly displacing Palestinian civilians and destroying every single building in sight, so they have nowhere to return to. Israeli strikes pounded targets elsewhere in Gaza on Thursday, and the health ministry said in its daily update that at least 38 Palestinians were killed and 137 were wounded in the previous 24-hour period. The ministry's numbers don't account Palestinians who are missing and presumed dead under the rubble or indirect deaths that were a result of the U.S.-backed Israeli siege. The ministry said the violence brought the death toll since October to 45,399 and the number of wounded to 107,940. In October, a group of American healthcare workers who volunteered in Gaza estimated in an open letter to Biden that the Israeli onslaught had killed at least 118,000 Palestinians, and that number is surely much higher at this point. All right, next up here, this one from Jason Ditz, antiwar.com. Midway through ceasefire, Israeli army moves deeper into southern Lebanon. So Thursday marks the 30-day mark in the 60-day ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel. While plainly obvious that the IDF military operations never really ceased, Israel is now openly talking about staying in Lebanon past the 60-day deadline. Even more concerning, Israel pushed the offensive deeper into Lebanon, seizing another town and firing machine guns as troops advanced, forcing the civilian population to flee once again. The town is nearly over 5 miles from the blue line, which separates Israel and Lebanon, deeper than Israel's invasion actually penetrated during the war that was supposed to end with last month's ceasefire. The town also lies along the Litani River, beyond which Hezbollah was supposed to move its forces after the war. But travel in occupied southern Lebanon is difficult business. Even 30 days into the ceasefire, Israel seems to attack anything and everything, trying to return to towns and villages that were seized. The roads around the latest town that was taken have now been closed by Lebanese officials in an effort to keep the civilian population safely away from the continuing Israeli incursions. Multiple voices have expressed growing concern that Israel's looming failure to withdraw from Lebanon and its continued firing into Lebanese territory despite the nominal ceasefire. UNIFIL, that's the UN peacekeeping mission to Lebanon, issued a statement today about the continuing damage Israel is causing in residential and agricultural areas and on roads throughout southern Lebanon. Israel has issued no statement on new incursions, nor any clarification surrounding media reports it's looking to stay beyond next month's deadline. Since the U.S. was meant to be a guarantor of the ceasefire, it is expected that the U.S. would say something about the hundreds of Israeli violations. So far, the U.S. has not even broached the subject. The U.S. seems to consider any ceasefire amount as it all proposed to prepared to do, and is actually all it is ever likely to do. All right, and then we're going to wrap up our show here today with the latest attacks on Yemen. This one from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. Israel launches another round of airstrikes on Yemen, killing at least 4. On Thursday, Israeli warplanes carried out another round of airstrikes against Yemen, targeting the capital of Sana'a and several ports, killing at least 4 people. The Israeli attacks on the Yemeni capital included strikes on the Sana'a International Airport, which killed 3 people and wounded 16 others. The head of the World Health Organization said he was at the airport during the attack. The head of the WHO said he was about to board a plane with WHO and UN staff when the attack started. One of our plane's crew members was injured. The air traffic control tower, the departure lounge, just a few meters from where we were, and the runway were damaged. We will need to wait for the damage to the airport to be repaired before we can leave. On the western coast of Yemen, Israeli strikes hit a power station in the city of Hadada and the ports of Saif and Ras Asa, which are all located in the Hadada province. At least 1 person was killed in Hadada and 3 people are missing. The Israeli military claimed to hit military infrastructure used by the Houthis and also acknowledged targeting energy infrastructure. The IDF said the targets were struck by the IDF included military infrastructure used by the Houthi terrorist organization for its military activities in both the Sana'a International Airport and the power stations. The attack marked the second round of Israeli airstrikes on Yemen within a week. Strikes launched last Thursday hit similar targets and killed at least 9 people. Israel has ramped up its attacks on Yemen as the Houthis have been more successful in their missile and drone attacks on Israeli territory. The Houthis, officially known as Ansar Allah, have vowed that they won't back down in the face of the stepped-up Israeli attacks. Since last year, the Houthis have been launching attacks on Israeli-linked shipping and firing missiles and drones at Israel in response to the onslaught in Gaza. Back in January 2024, the U.S. began a new bombing campaign against the Houthis and launched hundreds of missiles on Yemen that have done nothing but to escalate the situation. So in response, the Houthis have started attacking American shipping in the region. And, this is just awful, driving on a war in Yemen that shouldn't be going on. This could all be undone if the U.S. just pressures Israel to end its onslaught in Gaza. Seems like the one thing the U.S. is unwilling to ever do is put any pressure on Israel to stop any killing whatsoever. All right, everybody, that's it for the show today. Thank you all so much for tuning in and for all of your support. If you haven't already, subscribe to the Kyle Anzalone Show. Really appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.